What happens when the exact substance you're using to cure your nausea is, well, the very thing sending you to the emergency room with uncontrollable, violent vomiting?
Yeah, it's quite a paradox.
Right. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a terrifying medical paradox. And we're really getting into what happens to our bodies and our aging brains when society just broadly normalizes highly potent recreational drugs.
It's a fascinating and honestly a somewhat unsettling topic. I mean, we're looking at substances that are legally sanctioned, they're culturally celebrated, and even prescribed.
Yeah, everywhere.
Exactly. Yet biologically, they can act as these silent saboteurs, especially, as we get older and our neurochemistry starts to change.
Right. And to really understand this, we're doing something a bit unique today. We are synthesizing two incredibly different types of sources.
Yeah, they are very different.
So on one side, we've got a very clinical, data-driven medical news report from Insider Paper. It's detailing this rising mysterious illness that is just baffling ER doctors.
Which is wild on its own.
Completely.
Yeah.
And then on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, we're looking at a pair of highly confessional, deeply personal blog posts. They're written by a Japanese writer and former alcoholic who lives in the US, and he writes under the pen name QuietBeef.
I really love this pairing because when you just look at medical statistics, it's easy to detach, right?
Oh, for sure. It's just numbers on a page.
Exactly. But by combining the cold, hard data of emergency room visits with the raw, lived experience of someone battling their own neurochemistry, well, it allows us to view these substances differently.
Yeah, it makes it real.
Right. They aren't just chemical compounds or, political talking points. They're forces that fundamentally shape and sometimes entirely dismantle everyday human lives.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start with a substance that I think it's fair to say has undergone the biggest public relations makeover in modern history.
You're talking about cannabis.
Cannabis, exactly. For decades now, a massive part of its medical reputation has been built on its ability to reduce nausea. I mean, it's famous for helping cancer patients survive the horrific stomach issues that come with chemotherapy.
Which is a very real documented benefit.
Right. But our first source reveals this terrifying flip side. There's a condition doctors are increasingly dealing with called CHS.
Yes, CHS. That stands for cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And to understand why this is causing so much confusion in emergency rooms, we really just have to break down that medical jargon.
Break it down for us.
So hyperemesis essentially means severe, prolonged, relentless vomiting, which, as you just pointed out, is the exact opposite of what cannabis is famous for doing.
It's the ultimate paradox. I mean, if someone has a stomach ache or they feel nauseous, smoking marijuana is often pushed as the holistic, natural, safe remedy.
Right, the go-to cure.
But for a rapidly growing number of people, it is the exact thing causing the illness. The medical report we have details the case of a woman named Erica Hagler.
Yeah, her story is intense.
It really is. She's 33 years old. By all accounts, a completely healthy woman. She consumed cannabis multiple times a day. And out of nowhere, she gets hit with symptoms that are so extreme, she literally told ABC News, "I felt like I was going to die."
And if we look at the physiology of what she was experiencing, it's entirely understandable why she felt a sense of impending doom. I mean, this wasn't a mild case of food poisoning.
No.
She was experiencing violent shakes, a significantly elevated heart rate, severe dehydration, and just relentless, uncontrollable vomiting. From a biological standpoint, her body had entered a state of absolute crisis.
I want to focus on that dehydration for a second, because I think people underestimate how fast that can spiral.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you are vomiting relentlessly. Your body is losing vital fluid, sure, but it's also dumping your electrolytes, your potassium, your sodium.
Exactly. And those electrolytes, well, they are what conduct the electrical signals in your body. So when your potassium tanks, because you can't keep any fluids down, your heart loses its natural rhythm.
Which explains the heart rate.
Right, that leads to the elevated heart rate, the palpitations, your muscles can't fire correctly, which causes those violent shakes she was describing. Her cardiovascular system and her nervous system were essentially panicking because, well, the basic building blocks of cellular communication were just being flushed out of her body.
So Erica's in this terrifying state. She goes to the doctors, and what do they tell her? Do they say, hey, you're smoking too much weed, you have CHS?
No, not even close.
Right, no. They don't test her for a cannabis allergy or reaction. They initially told her she was experiencing symptoms related to a neurological or psychological disorder.
Which perfectly highlights the immense, just diagnostic, muddy waters surrounding CHS right now. In medical school, doctors are taught a very common phrase. When you hear hoofbeats, Think horses, not zebras.
Basically, look for the obvious answer.
Exactly. Look for the most common explanation first. So when a previously healthy 33-year-old presents with violent tremors and cyclical vomiting, a doctor's mind immediately goes to severe neurological events or maybe intense psychiatric crises, like a severe panic disorder.
Because they aren't expecting weed to do that.
Exactly. Historically, the medical literature says cannabis doesn't do this.
Right. The literature says cannabis stops this.
Precisely. The Mayo Clinic actually pointed out in our source material that because of the widespread normalized use of cannabis globally and how recently CHS has even been recognized as a distinct syndrome, there is a severe lack of long-term literature.
So they're flying blind.
Pretty much. It is vastly under-recognized and deeply underdiagnosed. Doctors simply haven't had the diagnostic framework to look at marijuana as the culprit for hyperemesis.
And it's clearly not just an isolated incident with Erica. The statistics in this insider paper report are staggering. There's a Canadian study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which, for those who don't know, JAMA is a massive, highly respected medical journal.
Oh, yeah, it's the gold standard.
Right. And they found that CHS-related emergency room visits increased by a factor of 13 between 2014 and 2021. I'll be super clear about that math for the listeners.
It's a huge number.
It's not 13%, a factor of 13. That is a 1,300% explosion in ER visits for this specific syndrome in just 7 years.
That kind of exponential growth in an emergency room setting is, frankly, a logistical nightmare. And what's truly fascinating and tragic, here is the mechanism of the trap itself.
What do you mean?
Well, Dr. Sam Turbati, who is the co-chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Cedars-Sinai, explains this dynamic perfectly. The fundamental challenge they have in the ER isn't just the physical symptoms, it's the psychology of the patient. The patients genuinely believe their marijuana use is helping them.
Because it's the prevailing cultural narrative. Weed cures nausea. It's practically a bumper sticker.
Precisely. So let's walk through the psychology of a CHS patient. A regular daily consumer starts developing the early stages of CHS. They start feeling severe abdominal pain and low-grade nausea.
Okay.
What is their immediate logical response based on everything society, the internet, and even certain medical communities have told them?
They smoke more weed to fix the stomachache.
Exactly. They consume more of the substance that is actively poisoning their system, which of course accelerates the hyperemesis, making the vomiting even worse.
Right.
And then the worsening symptoms make them panic, thinking they need even more cannabis to suppress it. It is a vicious, closed-loop cycle of self-poisoning. Dr. Turbati noted that for many patients sitting in an ER bed, accepting that cannabis, a substance they view as natural, holistic, and medicinal, is actually a poison to their specific biology. Well, it's an incredibly tough pill to swallow. They fight the diagnosis.
I mean, I think it's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline because the can was mislabeled water. You keep pouring it on, wondering why the flames are getting higher.
That's a brilliant way to conceptualize it. You are overriding the body's natural endocannabinoid system to the point of structural failure. And because there is no specific blood test or brain scan that definitively proves CHS, it's what we call a diagnosis of exclusion, the medical response in the emergency room is incredibly basic.
Yeah, they aren't administering some miracle anti-CHS serum, right?
No. It's purely supportive care. Dr. Turbati explains that in the ER, they basically just hook the patients up to IV fluids to combat that severe dehydration we talked about.
Just pumping them with water.
Yeah, fluids and electrolytes. They run basic blood panels to ensure the patient's kidneys aren't actively failing from the lack of water and the intense physical stress of the vomiting. They are just trying to keep the body's baseline survival systems online. But none of that is actually a cure for the syndrome itself.
The only actual cure, the absolute only way to stop that gasoline fire is to completely, 100%, stop smoking.
Abstinence is the only way.
But this raises a really disturbing question for anyone listening. If the medical community is just now starting to recognize this, and it generally takes a dramatic near-death ER visit to figure it out,
Yeah.
how many thousands of people are currently sitting at home right now entirely misdiagnosed?
It's a huge unknown.
Right. People who think they have a chronic stomach ulcer or IBS or some mystery illness, and they are treating their severe daily illness with the exact thing causing it.
It's a deeply sobering thought. And it perfectly illustrates the primary danger of assuming any substance is universally safe just because it's natural or culturally accepted. What acts as a medicine for one person's biology can be a devastating closed-loop toxin for another's, especially when we are talking about prolonged, heavy daily use over years.
And this psychological trap, This deeply held belief that a substance is your friend, your medicine, or your necessary escape, right up until the exact moment it destroys you. It's a perfect organic transition into our second set of sources.
Yes, the blog posts.
Right, we're shifting from the sterile clinical environment of the ER to a deeply personal, messy, lived experience. We are diving into the blog posts of QuietBeef. And this is where we really start to explore the illusion of control and how a brain actually descends into dependency.
And what's striking is how QuietBeef begins his reflection on dependency, because he doesn't start by analyzing his own childhood or his human flaws.
No, he goes in a completely different direction.
He starts by looking at fruit flies. Specifically, he cites a behavioral study from Tohoku University in Japan.
Which I'll admit feels like a really weird pivot when you're talking about human alcoholism.
It sounds a bit absurd at first.
It does. But when you read his reasoning, it makes total sense. He points out that fruit flies naturally love alcohol, which is true. They feed on fermenting, rotting fruit in the wild. But the Tohoku University study took it a step further. They found that when fruit flies are given free, unlimited access to alcohol in a lab setting, they naturally increase their intake day by day.
And let's pause and think about why that matters. The fruit fly study is a crucial starting point because it strips away all the human baggage.
Right.
It removes the morality, the social stigma, the excuses, and the complex psychological narratives we tell ourselves about addiction. It reveals that the descent into dependency is, at its absolute core, a deeply seated biological mechanism.
Right. The flies aren't drinking because their boss yelled at them or because they have unresolved childhood trauma or they stressed about their mortgage.
Exactly. They are drinking because the neural pathways in their tiny brains are being hijacked by the chemical properties of ethanol. The alcohol stimulates their reward centers, but it also creates a rapid tolerance.
So they need more to feel the same.
Exactly. The brain downregulates its natural receptors to compensate for the flood of chemicals. So the next day, the fly literally needs more alcohol just to achieve the same baseline feeling of normalcy. It proves that the biological susceptibility to addiction, the tendency to escalate dosage in the face of free access, is hardwired into the foundational neural architecture of living creatures.
Humans aren't immune to that.
Not at all. Humans are not exempt from this biology. We just have more complex rationalizations for it.
And QuietBeef knows this hardwired susceptibility intimately. He doesn't just look at the flies, He turns the microscope on himself. He shares this incredibly harrowing, visceral, personal story of his own alcohol dependency.
It's very brave of him to share it.
It is. He flashes back to the late autumn of 2007. He was living in the U.S. but taking a trip back to Japan. He was 43 years old at the time. And he casually mentions that in the span of a single week on this trip, he experienced his first 2 blackouts.
Which is a massive neurological red flag.
Huge.
For someone to reach their mid-40s, having been a regular drinker, and suddenly experience 2 complete memory blackouts in a single week, that indicates a profound structural shift in how their brain is suddenly processing, or rather failing to metabolize alcohol. The elasticity is gone.
I really want to dive into the second blackout he describes.
Yeah.
Because the way he sets the scene is terrifyingly vivid. And it shows how social environment plays into that biological trap.
Yeah, the context is everything here.
So he had traveled from Tokyo out to a rural town in the Tohoku region, which is where his family is originally from. That night, he is being, quote-unquote, welcomed by the local elites. And it sounds like a nightmare for an introvert.
Absolutely.
It's a marathon drinking session, starting in the early evening and going all the way to nearly 1 a.m. He's deeply exhausted from travel. He's struggling to even understand the heavy, rural, local dialect.
And the social pressure in that specific cultural context is immense. You have an expat returning home, surrounded by older, rural men of status in his family's hometown. There's a massive expectation of deference.
Yeah, and he even mentions enduring their harsh sexual harassment jokes. Just having to sit there, smile, nod, and continuously drink the free booze they keep pouring him. He says he doesn't even taste the alcohol anymore.
He's just surviving the night.
Right. He's just using it as a chemical shield. He just wants to escape the deep anxiety and the sheer fatigue of the situation.
And that is a classic universal trigger. QuietBeef explicitly points out that for vulnerable people, especially those struggling with social anxieties, neurodivergence, or even financial stress, that underlying anxiety turns into a dark form of what he calls entertainment.
Entertainment. That's a grim word for it.
It is grim. People push towards substances to forcibly alter their reality and escape the overwhelming pressure of the moment. The alcohol wasn't a beverage for him. It was a buffer against the discomfort of the dialect, the power dynamics, and his own internal exhaustion.
So he finally gets released from this excruciating party. His wife is driving their rental car back to the hotel. He gets in the passenger seat. He remembers chatting with her about how exhausted he is, complaining that the next day's plans are totally ruined because he's so tired.
A completely normal conversation.
Totally normal. He's looking out the window, taking in the dark scenery of the rural town. He has a very specific, crystal clear memory of seeing a pharmacy out the window. He even notes it's the specific pharmacy where his uncle usually buys energy drinks.
Right.
And then nothing.
A total instantaneous loss of time.
Here's where it gets really interesting. His next memory is purely auditory. He hears his wife's voice. First, it sounds really far away, like it's echoing down a tunnel, and then suddenly, it's sharply close. He opens his eyes, and he realizes he is completely horizontal. He is looking up at his wife's face.
That disorientation must be sickening.
He feels incredibly disoriented. The room, or the car, he isn't sure, feels like it's spinning. He has a profound, terrifying loss of orientation. He frantically asks her, "Where are we? Is it day or night?"
Let's talk about what is actually happening in his brain at that moment, because neurologically, a blackout is a terrifying event. It is a common misconception that a blackout is just falling asleep or passing out. It's not.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand this and, the listener understands this. He wasn't asleep. Because usually when we say someone drank until they passed out, we mean they went unconscious. Are you saying his brain was awake, he could physically talk and walk, but his memory just stopped working?
Exactly. It's a state called anterograde amnesia.
Anterograde amnesia.
Right. When someone consumes alcohol to the point of a blackout, the massive influx of ethanol essentially shuts down the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the region of the brain responsible for consolidating short-term experiences into long-term memories.
Okay.
Think of it like a video camera. The person is still awake, the lens is open, they are still talking, walking, and interacting with the world, just as QuietBeef was when he got into the car and chatted with his wife. But the alcohol has pressed stop on the record button. No tape is being recorded.
Wow.
So when he wakes up or comes back online, his brain frantically tries to stitch the timeline together, but there's just a terrifying, unbridgeable void between seeing that pharmacy window and looking up at his wife's face.
That is horrifying. Functionally awake, but the hard drive is unplugged, and the reality of that void when his wife explains it to him is chilling.
What does she say?
She informs him that they are parked in a hotel parking lot. It's 2:30 in the morning. He had passed out the second they pulled away from the party. He had been dead asleep in that car for an hour and a half. And the absolute scariest part, his wife hadn't just been sitting there quietly.
She was trying to wake him up.
She had been desperately trying to wake him up. She was shouting his name. She was physically shaking him. She even resorted to slapping his face. And he was completely 100% unresponsive. He was in a corpse-like state.
That level of physical unresponsiveness goes beyond a memory blackout. It is indicative of severe central nervous system depression. He wasn't just resting his eyes. His brain chemistry was so severely suppressed by the volume of alcohol that his brainstem was barely communicating with his body to respond to external pain stimuli, like being slapped.
And as he is sitting there in the dark parking lot trying to process this, realizing the massive emotional and physical burden he just placed on his wife, he makes a really profound observation. He notes the inherent, potentially fatal danger of his situation.
Because of where he was.
Right. He's an expat, a foreigner who mostly lives in the U.S., but he's currently incapacitated in a rural Japanese town he barely recognizes. He realizes that if a medical emergency had happened in that car, or if his wife hadn't been there to protect him, he was in a state where he couldn't even physically walk to a hotel front desk to ask for help in his native language.
Utterly defenseless.
He recognizes that losing your faculties, especially in an unfamiliar environment, is a potentially fatal vulnerability. The illusion of control he thought he had over his drinking was completely, irrevocably shattered in that hotel parking lot.
It's a moment of stark clarity. It's the realization that the substance hasn't just altered his mood. It has stripped him of his fundamental basic survival mechanisms. But, this speaks volumes about the biology of addiction we saw with the fruit flies.
How so?
Because even this terrifying event, this near-death level of unresponsiveness, wasn't enough to make him quit immediately. The biological pull was so strong that it took years and a completely different, almost absurd catalyst to finally break the cycle.
Right. You would think waking up like a corpse in a parking lot with your wife crying and slapping you would be the grand moral epiphany, the ultimate wake-up call. But it wasn't. What actually broke his addiction wasn't the fear of losing his mind or ruining his marriage or dying in a rural town.
It was something much more superficial.
It was his vanity. He wanted bigger muscles.
It is wonderfully, frustratingly human. The grand tragedies often don't change us, but our daily, mundane desires do.
He talks about how a few years later he had moved back to the U.S. and he started swimming for exercise. And he noticed that no matter how much he worked out, he wasn't building any muscle. In fact, his body felt softer and his overall health was just getting worse. His digestion was a mess.
So he looked into it.
Yeah, so he starts doing some basic research on fitness, and he hits a massive biological wall regarding his nightly alcohol habit.
He essentially discovered 4 key physiological facts that completely reframed his relationship with alcohol. And he reframed it not as a moral failing, but as a biological roadblock to his goal. First, he realized his diet severely lacked protein, which is the basic building block of muscle.
Okay, easy enough to fix by protein, but the second fact is where alcohol comes in, right?
Right. Second, and this is crucial, alcohol acts as a powerful diuretic. It suppresses a hormone called vasopressin, which tells your kidneys to hold on to water.
And without it?
Without it, your body violently flushes essential minerals and water out through your urine. Muscle synthesis, the actual cellular repair and growth of muscle tissue, requires a highly hydrated environment. By drinking every night, he was creating an internal desert where muscle formation was biologically impossible.
That makes sense. And third, he looked at his daily schedule. He realized that the timing required for effective protein powder consumption pre-workout, post-workout, before bed left zero room in his day for his prolonged drinking sessions. He literally didn't have the hours in the day to do both.
And fourth, the absolute nail in the coffin. He learned that alcohol consumption actively hinders muscle regeneration and formation by a massive 20%.
20% is huge.
It's massive. We have to look at the liver here. From a metabolic standpoint, alcohol is a deadly toxin. When you ingest it, your liver stops everything else it is doing, including metabolizing proteins and repairing torn muscle tissue, and prioritizes eliminating the alcohol above all other bodily functions.
Oh, wow.
It's an all-hands-on-deck emergency response. So his workouts were effectively being canceled out by his liver's desperate attempt to clear the ethanol.
So he's faced with this choice. He's got limited funds. He literally sat down, looked at his budget, and realized the cost of a month's supply of high-quality protein powder was almost exactly the same as his monthly alcohol budget. He couldn't afford both.
He had to choose.
So he chose the protein powder. It wasn't a moral crusade. He didn't go to rehab. It was a purely economic and vanity-driven choice. And the results were immediate. His physique radically improved.
But it wasn't just his muscles, right?
Yeah. No, more than that. His constant chronic digestive issues, the daily diarrhea he had just accepted as normal, completely disappeared.
Right.
Because he wasn't constantly inflaming his stomach lining with alcohol. He absorbed nutrients better, his energy returned, and his overall health absolutely skyrocketed.
It's a brilliant, real-world example of substituting a destructive chemical dependency with a constructive, biologically supportive routine. The blackouts were a void, an absence of experience, but the muscle growth from the protein and swimming was a visible daily addition to his life. It replaced the void with a tangible purpose.
It's fascinating and almost deeply human that vanity, just wanting your swimming workouts to yield visible muscles, was a more effective catalyst for getting sober than the terrifying psychological blackouts.
It really is. But, in his writing, QuietBeef doesn't just celebrate his success. He contrasts his story with a deeply tragic parallel narrative to illustrate exactly what happens when that biological cycle isn't broken.
Yeah, he tells the story of his wife's friend. This friend was married to a guy who was very, very similar to QuietBeef back in the day. A fellow beer lover, drank every single night, same age demographic.
A fun guy, right.
Yeah, he describes him as a bit of a wild guy, a speed demon, who actually did some jail time for reckless driving in his youth, but generally he was a fun, loving, sociable husband. But while QuietBeef chose the protein powder in the swimming pool, this husband kept drinking. He maintained his continuous heavy drinking habit right into middle age.
And this brings us to a really critical concept in the text. Aging as a downward slope. Behaviors that a 20-year-old or 30-year-old body can somewhat mask, metabolize, or recover from, well, they become devastating biological traps when the body hits its 40s and 50s.
The body just can't keep up.
No. The liver's efficiency drops, the brain's elasticity diminishes, the biological resilience simply evaporates.
QuietBeef describes how this fun-loving husband completely transformed. His continuous drinking led to severe, medically recognized brain shrinkage, and the behavioral changes were terrifying. When he drank, he didn't just get goofy or sleepy anymore.
It got dark.
He morphed into a violent, completely unrecognizable addict. He would scream, he became totally unmanageable, he'd break things, and then the next day, he'd have absolutely zero memory of his actions. It was an absolute nightmare for his wife.
The author lays out a very grim but scientifically accurate formula for this ruin. It starts with dependency. That transitions into continuous drinking over decades. That chronic, decades-long toxicity leads to significant brain shrinkage. Specifically, we are talking about atrophy in the frontal lobes.
And the frontal lobe is basically the brain's civilization center, right?
Exactly. The frontal lobe controls your inhibition, your judgment, your impulse control, and your emotional regulation. It is the filter that stops you from acting on every base animal instincts.
So if that's damaged...
So when that physical brain damage occurs, when that tissue literally shrinks and dies off, you arrive at the final stage of the formula. Violent behavior without memory. The filter is gone. You are left with pure, unfiltered limbic system, emotion, anger, fear, aggression fueled by alcohol, with a hippocampus that isn't recording any of it.
The end result of this tragic formula. The wife had to divorce him, purely for her own physical safety. This once fun-loving, social guy was essentially exiled from his own life. The family had to make arrangements to send him to live with his aunt in a rural, remote town in the Pacific Northwest, simply because he could no longer function in normal society without being a danger. It's a complete, total dismantling of a human life.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the cure, the daily beer to relax after a long day becoming the absolute poison. And what makes QuietBeef's writing so powerful here is that he doesn't feel superior to this man.
He knows how close he was to that.
He recognizes how razor-thin the margin was. He knows that without his random pivot to swimming and protein powder, that exact grim formula would have been his reality. He realized that aging isn't just about getting wrinkles or gray hair. It's about a rapidly diminishing margin for error when it comes to the chemicals we put into our bodies.
So QuietBeef manages to fix his body. He escapes the alcohol trap. He gets his brain and his life back. But his deep dive into his own vulnerability doesn't end there. Because while he changed, the world around him was also changing. Which brings us to a massive shift in his environment and a new, emerging threat he sees on the horizon.
Right. Having survived the devastation of alcohol, QuietBeef is now intensely focused on the widespread legalization of recreational marijuana.
Specifically, he points out a very specific date, April 21st, 2022. That was the day recreational marijuana was officially legalized and sales began in the state of New Jersey, which is where he presumably resides, or which heavily affects his local area.
And he is very against it.
Oh, he is fiercely, unapologetically, and vocally opposed to this.
His primary argument isn't just a rehash of, 1980s drug war panic, though. It's rooted in the modern chemistry and cultivation of the plant itself. He argues that the recreational marijuana being sold in shiny Apple Store-like dispensaries today is fundamentally not the same plant that people were smoking in the 1960s, 70s, or even the 90s.
Let's talk about that, because I think a lot of people just assume weed is weed. But he points out that it has been heavily, purposefully cultivated, genetically selected, and engineered to yield incredibly high levels of THC. He notes that the THC levels in these modern strains are often double or even triple what they used to be historically.
To give some historical context to his point, in the 1970s, the average THC content of seized marijuana was around 2 to 3%.
Wow, that low.
Yeah, that low. Today, standard dispensary flower routinely sits between 20 and 30%, and concentrates can go up to 80 or 90%. Through decades of selective breeding, essentially stripping away the other cannabinoids like CBD to maximize THC yield, the botanical profile of the plant has been radically altered.
So, the blogger is basically saying that treating modern recreational weed like a casual, natural, earthy herb is like comparing a modern energy drink spiked with pure synthesized caffeine and taurine to a cup of mild, natural green tea.
That's a great analogy.
Right. They might both technically give you a buzz, but the chemical payload hitting your nervous system is entirely different. Because of this, he vehemently rejects the popular claims that marijuana is less addictive or less harmful than alcohol. And he gets very pointed about the medical claims. He outright calls the widespread internet idea that marijuana cures cancer a blatant, dangerous lie.
Now, I think it is important for us to pause here and properly contextualize his broader arguments.
Yes, absolutely.
Because in his blog posts, he does step into a highly political realm. Our role here is to impartially report on his written perspective, to understand his anxiety and his logic, without endorsing or validating his political conclusions.
Absolutely. We are just reporting the facts of the source material. QuietBeef explicitly states his belief that democratic states, which are generally leading the charge on legalization, are actively fostering social decay. In his view, legalizing and normalizing a highly potent substance that fundamentally alters reality will lead to a cascade of societal failures.
He paints a pretty bleak picture.
He does. He predicts increased homelessness, family collapse, severe child neglect, and a general breakdown of civic and social order. He views it as a catalyst for community ruin, in the exact same way alcohol ruined his friend's husband.
Again, we aren't taking a side on that political framing. But it is crucial to understand why he is so personally panicked by this change in the law. It's not just pearl clutching, it's rooted in biology.
Okay, walk us through the biology of his panic.
His panic is rooted in the concept of tolerance, which we discussed earlier with the fruit flies. Because the THC levels in modern cultivated marijuana are so unnaturally high, the human brain builds a tolerance much, much faster than it would have with the 3% THC of the 1970s.
Meaning the baseline keeps moving, the receptors get flooded.
Exactly. The brain's endocannabinoid system downregulates its natural receptors to handle this massive unnatural influx of external THC. So to achieve the same high or the same level of escape from anxiety, the user requires increasingly higher doses. This rapid escalation directly increases the risk of deep dependency.
He also brings up a version of the gateway drug theory, but he frames it a bit differently. He argues that once society normalizes the search for what he calls non-ordinary euphoria, that deep-seated desire to chemically alter your reality instead of dealing with it, it inevitably leaves vulnerable people to seek out harder substances when the modern weed inevitably builds tolerance and no longer does the trick.
It's a pattern he recognizes.
Yeah, it's the exact same neurochemical path he saw with his own alcohol abuse, just in a different chemical vehicle.
And this shifts his writing from a broad, abstract societal fear to a highly individualized neurological reality. We have to ask, why is he, QuietBeef, so specifically terrified of this new legalized landscape? What happens if he walks into one of those dispensaries?
And this is where we get to the core of his thesis. Because for QuietBeef, this isn't just about what might happen to society. It is about what will happen to his specific aging brain if he were to partake.
He is incredibly transparent about the lasting damage he carries from his past. The years of severe daily alcohol abuse, combined with his historical use of heavy psychiatric medications, have left permanent scars on his nervous system.
He specifically mentions taking the antidepressant Paxil for severe panic attacks he suffered following his father's death. And he notes that it caused bizarre, intensely severe side effects. He even humorously, though grimly, notes experiencing a 4-hour continuous erection, medically known as priapism, from just the very first pill.
You know, when I first read about his reaction to Paxil, I actually had to reread it. A 4-hour side effect of that nature from a single introductory dose of an SSRI. It shows a nervous system and a vascular system that is exquisitely, almost dangerously sensitive to chemical intervention.
Right. And that sensitivity hasn't gotten better. It has only compounded with age. Now, in his 50s, he reveals that drinking just 2 small bottles of beer, a completely minimal, casual amount for most healthy adults, causes severe tremors in his fingers.
From just 2 beers.
And those tremors don't just go away when he sleeps it off or sobers up. They take a full week to subside.
A full week of neurological shaking from 2 beers. That perfectly illustrates a phenomenon similar to the kindling effect in neuroscience, where repeated withdrawals or historical abuse makes the nervous system hyperreactive to even minor stimuli. His nervous system is operating on a razor's edge. Any chemical interference sends it into a tailspin.
Which explains his stance on THC.
Exactly. This is exactly why he looks at modern, high-potency THC not as a fun recreational tool, but as a literal weapon against his biology. He actually outlines the specific neurochemistry of THC in his post to explain his terror.
And we really need to break this down because it is fascinating. He points out that THC acts on the midbrain by releasing dopamine, GABA, and glutamate. This is the initial rush. This is what causes the euphoria, the relaxation, the high that people seek out.
But then the chemical payload goes to work on the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, the exact areas responsible for memory, focus, and executive decision-making.
Right. And in those specific areas, he notes that THC actually reduces the release of acetylcholine and GABA while simultaneously increasing glutamate and noradrenaline.
Let's pause here and translate that because it is so vital.
Please do.
Acetylcholine is critical for memory and learning, so if you reduce that, you are impairing your ability to form thoughts. GABA is essentially the brain's brake pedal. It calms your nervous system down and prevents overstimulation. Glutamate is the gas pedal. It excites the neurons. And noradrenaline is basically a stress hormone tied to the fight or flight response.
Okay, so when you say THC decreases GABA and increases glutamate and noradrenaline in the hippocampus, what's happening is the brain's brakes are being violently cut. At the exact same moment, a brick is thrown on the accelerator while the engine is flooded with stress hormones.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy. It sounds like a biochemical recipe for an absolute panic attack.
It doesn't sound like a fun high. It sounds inescapable.
It absolutely is, especially for someone whose brain chemistry is already irregular. Furthermore, QuietBeef notes a very personal detail. He suffers from developmental disorders, specifically ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD.
So his baseline dopamine and GABA systems are already completely atypical before he even touches a substance.
Exactly. For someone with ADHD, dopamine regulation is already a daily, exhausting struggle. For someone with ASD, sensory processing and baseline anxiety are often managed through highly specific, delicate neurological balances.
So adding high THC weed to that.
Introducing a massive, high-potency dose of modern THC into that already precarious environment isn't recreational. It is a neurological grenade. He views modern THC as a brain-destroying weapon that will inevitably exacerbate his existing conditions, trigger those severe week-long tremors, cause crippling panic attacks, and interfere dangerously with the daily medications he now relies on to function.
So what does this all mean for the average person listening? Does society's broad brush of calling a substance legal or recreational mask the deeply individual, sometimes fatal neurological risks? Just because something is legal to buy at a shiny new dispensary with nice branding and friendly staff doesn't mean your specific brain can afford the biological cost.
I think that is the core, vital insight of this entire deep dive. A law passed by a voting public dictates legality, but it does absolutely nothing to dictate biology.
It doesn't change your neurochemistry.
Right. A substance can be broadly deemed safe or medicinal by society, yet act as a literal targeted neurotoxin for specific vulnerable populations. And as QuietBeef discovered with his hand tremors and his friend's brain shrinkage, aging acts as a ruthless multiplier for these negative effects. The older you get, the more your brain loses its elasticity, its inherent ability to bounce back from chemical interference.
It's a profound warning. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, there was one very specific, highly practical, and honestly terrifying warning from QuietBeef's text that we absolutely need to share, especially for any listeners who travel internationally.
Yes, this is crucial. While marijuana might be perfectly legal to buy and consume in New Jersey, QuietBeef points out a massive, often hidden legal trap for international visitors, specifically from Japan.
Oh, this is wild.
If a Japanese tourist comes to New Jersey, partakes in the legally available weed, has a great time, and then returns to Japan, they are in serious legal jeopardy. Because of Japan's strict extraterritorial jurisdiction laws regarding cannabis, if they are subjected to a urine test upon return, perhaps through a random customs check, a traffic stop, or a mandatory workplace screening, and they fail it, they can be arrested on the spot in Japan.
Because in Japan, cannabis remains strictly illegal. And having the metabolized chemical markers in your system is enough for a criminal conviction, regardless of where on planet Earth you consumed it. The Japanese legal system does not care that you were on vacation in a legalized American state.
It is a stark, real-world reminder that the consequences of these normalized substances transcend our individual biology. They cross international borders, cultures, and rigid legal jurisdictions.
If we synthesize this whole journey we've been on today, it's been wild. We started in the emergency room, looking at the clinical, baffling paradox of CHS. People literally vomiting relentlessly, destroying their kidneys from a plant they firmly believed was curing their nausea.
We looked at the Tohoku fruit flies, reminding us that the relentless pull of addiction isn't just a human moral failing, it is deeply biologically hardwired into the neural pathways of living creatures.
We followed QuietBeef as he survived the terrifying loss of time, waking up like a corpse in a Japanese hotel parking lot, only to eventually save his own life, his brain, and his marriage by choosing the vanity of protein powder and swimming over the slow death of daily beer.
And finally, we explored his deeply personal neurochemical terror regarding the rapid normalization of high-potency THC, recognizing that what society flippantly calls recreation can be a literal neurological minefield for an aging, atypical brain.
Which brings us right back to where we started. If our bodies, our livers, and our brains fundamentally change as we age, does the substance that was perfectly safe for us to metabolize at 20 suddenly become a hidden, devastating danger at 50? The medical landscape might be murky, the diagnostic manuals might be lagging behind the culture, but the biological reality of our own unique neurochemistry is undeniable. So next time you see a new wellness trend or a newly legalized substance hitting the shelves with slick marketing and promises of natural relief, ask yourself, is this medicine for the masses, or is it a highly specific, potentially dangerous chemistry experiment on your own
If you
aging brain?
enjoyed this, smash the like button, give this video some hype to help it reach more people, and hit subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next video.